Hey, good afternoon, class. Welcome in. Well, today we have quite a bit to talk about. We are going to essentially put three discussions into one, but it should go relatively quickly. We're going to take a look at the European theater of war. And now, again, in a regular setting, a lot of information that we would kind of draw out over the course of a week, but this time we're going to try to lump it all into one. So let's start with Germany, and let's take a look at what they do after they invade Poland. So, after invading Poland on September 1st of 1939, Hitler implements the military strategy known as Blitzkrieg. And Blitzkrieg is the lightning war. This involves a series of quickly coordinated attacks using air and ground forces. The Germans are going to use tanks, air raids, and massive infantry to bully their way into territories they wish to conquer. Vastly different than what we saw in trench warfare just 20 years earlier in World War I. As the Germans take Western Poland, the Soviets are going to carve out Eastern Poland for themselves. Germany and the Soviet Union are going to maintain a non-aggression pact. They're not going to fight. However, things are going to get a little bit tense for each of them very soon. So this Blitzkrieg map really shows how quick and how rapid Germany is starting to use its war machine into other areas of Europe. Now, the Soviets are going to struggle with Finland. As the Soviets split Poland, they also sought to expand into Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. These countries couldn't muster much of a defense. They had a hard time, and the Soviets are kind of absorbed these areas. However, the Soviets also tried to conquer Finland. This proved to be much more difficult. Stalin sent over 1 million troops into a harsh Finnish terrain in the winter of 1940. Although outmanned and outnumbered, the Finns managed to hold out and inflict heavy Soviet casualties. Yet in March of 1940, Finland formally surrendered to the USSR. Now, understand this. There's also something going on called the Phony War, or the Sitzkrieg. With Great Britain and France now in the war, each nation takes the time to mobilize and organize their troops. Between October of 1939 and April of 1940, the Allies and the Axis powers partake in the Sitzkrieg, or the Sitting War, where really not much action is going on. Many felt that full-scale warfare wouldn't occur and that each side would not attack one another. However, in a surprise sequence of attacks, Germany quickly dominates and devastates Denmark and Norway in the spring of 1940. The Germans built bases in these locations to strike the British. So now they're within striking distance, or within the islands themselves. They are going to try to use their Luftwaffe Air Force, and that is alarming for the British. So in May of 1940, Hitler's going to obliterate the Netherlands. He's going to obliterate Luxembourg and Belgium. He's going to sweep through these areas. The sweep of these nations allowed the Germans to position themselves to strike against the French. Hitler then accesses the Ardennes Forest and the Maginot Line. These old World War I battlegrounds were simply overrun by the new Blitzkrieg tactics. The Germans were knocking on France's door. Now, the rescue at Dunkirk. They made a film about this. There's a famous rescue mission in which Allied forces were saved by tugboats, yachts, motorboats, and fishing vessels off the beaches of Dunkirk. This is a French port city. Over 338,000 soldiers were saved. So a major mistake by the Germans here, not able to strike the British when the British are on their heels. And this rescue at Dunkirk is, again, also referred to as the miracle at Dunkirk, an unbelievable event that the British people came to the rescue of these soldiers. After Dunkirk, French resistance against the Germans was futile. The Germans conquered Paris on June 14, 1940, and French leaders surrendered on June 22nd. The Germans set up a puppet government in the city of Vichy. In exile, Charles de Gaulle would operate France's government and conduct French resistance from behind the scenes in Great Britain. Germany would occupy France between 1940 and 1944. Again, here are some famous images of, again, the Nazis marching into Paris. You've got Hitler and his associates at the Eiffel Tower. Okay? Now, the Battle of Britain. With France knocked out of the war, only Great Britain stood against Germany. Great Britain was led by new Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Churchill's tenacity to never surrender became a rallying cry for the British. Hitler's first objective in the invasion of Great Britain was to decimate the RAF, the Royal Air Force, with the Luftwaffe, and then land more than 250,000 soldiers on British shores. In the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe began bombing British cities and industry. So right away, the Blitz is underway in Great Britain. Despite the constant bombardment, the British never gave in. Instead, the RAF fought back, and the British used the help of two new technological devices. First, the British began using radar, which would track incoming warplanes. Also, the British had access to the Enigma machine, which decrypted German codes. By the end of 1940, the Germans opted for night raids only. German bombing would continue into the spring of 1941, but because of the outstanding resistance from the British, Hitler opted to turn his attention to the Mediterranean and the Eastern Front. Again, here are some images from the Battle of Britain. And a famous quote here from Winston Churchill: "We shall defend our island. Whatever the cost may be, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." Again, Winston Churchill, much different than his predecessor, Neville Chamberlain. So now Hitler has run into a roadblock with Great Britain. But let's look at elsewhere in Europe, okay? So, the Mediterranean and Eastern Front. After dealing with fierce resistance from Great Britain, Hitler opts to look toward the Balkans and ultimately go up against the Soviet Union. First, Hitler makes it clear that he wants to help Mussolini in North Africa. Great Britain's Suez Canal and the oil fields are basically the prize here. In the Middle East, all that oil, that's what they're trying to get to. Now, Britain's going to fight back. The Italian campaign in North Africa proved to be a disaster. British fighting forces repelled the Italians over 500 miles and took over 130,000 Italian prisoners. This weakness was referred to as the soft underbelly of the Axis. To reinforce the situation, Hitler sent in the Afrika Korps. This was a tank force led by General Erwin Rommel. A series of intense battles led the Germans with the upper hand. Rommel became known as the Desert Fox for his efforts. Again, here is Erwin Rommel. Now, with Rommel in North Africa, Hitler began to scheme plans for an attack against the Soviets. Hitler campaigns into the Balkans and uses this as a basis for his operation. These bases would put the Germans closer to the Soviets. Hitler convinced Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary to join the Axis powers and was able to easily conquer Yugoslavia and Greece. The march toward the Soviet Union was only a matter of time. So, under this new operation, Operation Barbarossa, the Balkans are again under Nazi control. Hitler begins Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941. The Soviets were not prepared for the attack. Although massive in numbers, the troops were not trained well and outdated in their equipment. Germany pushed nearly 500 miles into Russia. However, the Soviets used scorched earth policy in their retreat. Sound familiar? This bogged down the war into another war of attrition. With Leningrad surrounded, Hitler bombed the city and essentially starved them from the inside out. People were so desperate they began eating horses, dogs, and cats. It had got so awful that they ate crows and rats to survive. Hitler made the mistake of trying to take Moscow in the winter. This would cost the Germans 500,000 lives. So here's a map and a look at Operation Barbarossa. Okay. Now, our final piece here. So again, this is the European theater. It's the fighting that's taking place in Europe. In 1942, Britain is alone against the Axis. However, the United States is now going to be in the mix. They're going to be involved. General Dwight Eisenhower is going to be the supreme Allied commander of the European theater. After the Allies invade through Sicily, they're going to move into the heart of Italy. Mussolini is going to be overthrown and basically hung in the middle of the street. Okay, he's going to be killed. So Italy, now in the middle of the 1940s, is going to switch sides. All right, Mussolini is out, and all of a sudden they're going to switch sides and fight with the Allies. But let's take a look at Stalingrad, because this is really the turning point in the Eastern Front. So the Nazis were fighting Russia on Stalingrad from August of 1942 into February of 1943. It is one of the bloodiest battles in the history of combat, in the history of warfare. The Nazis are defeated, and it's a turning point of the war for the Allies. So they're repelled, and they can't advance on the Eastern Front. Now, with that being said, there are plans to invade Europe and get back into the heart of Europe and take back what was lost. So this is where we start seeing the forming operations of D-Day. General Eisenhower, again, is going to plan D-Day for June 6 of 1944. It is an Allied invasion. across the English Channel and into Normandy, France. It is the largest military invasion in history. So with this in mind, the Germans are going to actually put some of their weaker forces on the beach. They had assumed that the Allies were actually going to invade at a different beach, and therefore, again, on the beaches, we see, again, at D-Day here, we see the boats that are leading up into Normandy, all right? We see the beaches that are going to be hit. Again, you have Utah, you have Omaha, you have Sword, you have Gold, and you have Juneau. All these are Allied beaches. The two American beaches that we are familiar with, again, are Utah and Omaha. Okay? So, this invasion is huge. The Allies are getting back into France, and Germany is on its heels. So, Germany is going to retreat. They're going to have one last major offensive, and this is going to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. Allies were basically pushing from the west and from the south through Italy and from the east. So, Germany is surrounded. And all of a sudden, again, Hitler is on his last legs, okay? So with, again, defeat imminent, the associates around Hitler are going to go along with him inside a bunker. Hitler's going to commit suicide. Other people like Goebbels are going to commit suicide so that they could do this before they get captured. Germany's going to officially surrender on May 7th of 1945. This is known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe. And now, which we'll take a look at next week, the Allies have to figure out how to defeat Japan. But under all of this, and as the Allies get into Europe, and I want you to, as we take a look at the videos today, this is where concentration camps and this is where genocide is going to be discovered, an event known as the Holocaust. And we're going to take a look at that also next week. Okay? Wow, a lot to talk about in just a short amount of time. I appreciate you guys following along. I hope you guys have a great day. Have a great weekend. We're going to continue focusing on our final projects. All right? Bye, everybody. Take care.